Hey everyone, my name is Brittany Jones. I am a technical training consultant here at SAS, and for the presentation today, we are going to talk about creating reports again and again and again with the macro language. Now this presentation is going to be heavily demo based, but I do want to set the scene a little bit. So let's take a look at what's going to happen. For our presentation and for this scenario, what will have happen is we will be the people that are creating the reports, of course. And we are working for a retail company that sells different products like different shirts, shoes, particular types of pants. And we are creating reports that'll help our company determine what products are really good, what products aren't as good. Usually whenever you think of working with retail data, you're always thinking profits and sales and things like that. But for our reports, we are going to focus on customer satisfaction, whether they like our particular products or whether they do not like our particular products. So we do have some raw data where we have the order date that our customer placed, we have their customer ID, where they're from, the city and the state, and then we also have the product itself as well as the product group that it comes from. When a customer orders a product, they can go back with the review page and on a star system of 1 star to 5 stars, list what they liked or didn't like. So for example, with style, 1 to 5 stars. Did they find the product was comfortable? Did they think it was a good value? And then they have that overall rating. So each of these will be on a 5-star scale. For the person from Georgia, maybe for example, they thought that our training shorts were decently stylish, but they weren't all that comfortable or valued. So they have a 2 for overall, versus with the person from Arizona, they said they weren't very stylish, but they were really, really comfortable. So overall, gave it about a 3 for the training shorts. We won't be working from scratch to create these reports because we've already been working on reports to work with satisfaction. It's just that we've primarily focused on using the product_group column. So we have product group, and then we'll look at the reviews from style or from comfort or overall. Where our job for this demo is going to come in is management not only wants us to consider the product group, management also wants us to consider our state and provinces, which means we're going to have 3 different versions of a report. But before I talk about the versions, let's actually see what the reports look like. There will be 2 reports that we'll work with. One is going to be the average overall satisfaction rating by product group. And this isn't shown by state just yet. This is just overall, where we have a column for product group with our report. And then we'll have we'll have an average overall rating. For that average overall rating, any ratings that are below 3 stars are going to show up in this kind of salmon color. To create this report, we have the code on the right side. And for this one, I will start from the bottom and work my way up the code. Overall, the way that this report is created is through a proc print step, where we'll have proc print, date equals, the table that gets created above that I'll mention soon. We don't want to have the obs column, so we have that no obs. And we also want to include labels in the report. For the columns that are used, we'll have product_group and then the average column. What's really going in and making this report a little bit better and a little bit easier on the eyes is that we have a background to any of our different ratings that are below 3 stars. And we can have a background color of red or blue, whatever we'd like. But for this particular report, our background color is being determined by a format. And the format is called underperform. Going up to our next step with our proc format. This is where we're creating that format called underperform. So with our value statement, we're saying ratings that are from 0 all the way up to, but not exactly 3, we're going to have the word salmon, and that is being used within our style equals and our background equals options, sub-options. Finally, to create the table, or finally for going from bottom to top, we have our proc SQL. So we created the table average overall, by going to the product underscore group column. Let me go back in the slide. So we took product group, and we also took the overall column, and we got the average for the overall column. We also wanted to add in a label so that that'll look better on the report with average overall rating. We took this from the product reviews table, and then we grouped by product group so that we have one row for each individual product group, and then we get to see those averages. So this will be one report. The second report is where we're looking at the breakdown of our different reviews. So while the first report focused on just the average, this time we're going to see, for example, with the Orion clothing product group, how many 1 stars were there? How many 2 stars were there for their product groups? So we have our overall satisfaction, 1 to 5 star rating. For this report, it's being created with a proc freq step. So we'll have proc freq, data equals product reviews. So going back to that original raw data. And on our tables statement, we're creating a two-way frequency report. We have product group and then the column of overall. And we just want to have the counts. We don't need to see any percentages or things like that. For our where statement, this gives us the flexibility to say, instead of looking at stars 1 through 5, we can change this to be where it's 2 to 4 or 1 to 3 if we wanted to just focus in on those reviews under 3 stars and to see how many that there are. So these are the reports that are already created for us that we've worked with before. Where our job is going to come in is for report number 1 as well as report number 2, I would like, or management will like us to be able to select one state to focus on instead of seeing all of our different states represented. The second version of this report is for this proc freq report, management will like to see a report for each state listed out. So instead of just one, we're going to have many reports created. So we'll have one version of the reports. That'll be if we just want general overall for the whole country. The second version of the report is just choosing one state to focus on. The third version of the report will be having the proc frequency reports listed out multiple times for each state. Then, once we get those reports created in SAS, we also want to send those out to Excel because not every single person works within SAS. Sometimes people really want to have their reports written out in Excel. So with that in mind, with our 3 versions of our reports and then creating an Excel document, let's pop on over to our virtual image. Getting over to our virtual image, the first thing that I want to show off is that our review worked and that our reports worked. With our tab Current Reports, we are looking at our proc SQL step, and that first report was at average satisfaction rating. To create average overall, we're selecting product underscore group. We have the average overall as average from product reviews and then the grouping. This creates that table that'll have that average amount. We have that proc format that'll create the underperform format so that any of those averages that are less than 3 will be colored salmon. And we use that format within our proc print step as our background color. For that report 2, we had that proc frequency showing that breakdown of the satisfaction rates. So I'll run all of this together just to make sure that this works. And we see from our results, we have our first report, average overall satisfaction, and then we see for our second report that breakdown, looking at our different product groups. We also have that output data table that was created as well with product group, and we have average. So now that we know our reports work, we get a second chance to see it. Since this is something that we've done before, and these types of reports are created multiple times, there's also a macro definition that's been created for us that we're going to edit to include being able to deal with our states. So clicking over to my second tab, This is where we'll have our macro definition. And think of a macro definition as being able to use reusable code. In one of my macro classes, I like to explain it like having some big event, maybe it's a holiday, maybe it's a party, and you have so much food left over, you want to keep eating on it, you have leftovers, so you put it in a Tupperware container. Think about the macro definition as like that particular container that you're able to bring out when you need it and reuse it. So you have our percent macro, and we have a name of ratings report. Ratings report will be the name of our macro definition that we'll call. And when we call ratings report, it will execute the code down below in the middle. In parentheses next to ratings report, this is when we have something called keyword parameters. With our keyword parameters, these will create macro variables that will be used inside of my program. So we have one for rating type, star low, and star high. What's really good about using keyword parameters is that when we do our call to our macro definition, these overall 1 and 5 will be our default values. We'll talk about a call in just a bit. With rating type, star low and star high, I want to show you where are these being used. Looking at line number 7, remember from our previous report, our previous program where we had average overall? We have average ampersand rating type. That will fill in the word overall to help us create the name of that table. We could have also decided to use a different rating type, for example, value. If we changed over to value, then we're able to fill that in, or SAS will fill that in for us. For line 8, same idea. For that average, we want to get the average of whatever rating type is included, whether it's overall or value or style. And we'll also use rating type for our label. Proc format will be the same. For title 1 for our proc print, that'll include that macro variable to include whatever value is there, in this case overall. And we'll also have the same thing for that proc print statement with ampersand rating type. In the second report, in title 2, it will include ampersand rating type, so we'll have overall, dash, ampersand star low to ampersand star high. That is where we'll include the 1 and then the 5 that's coming in. We also have that ampersand star low, ampersand star high in line 33, where we're determining what star ratings do we want to show on our proc freak report. Right above, at the top, we have ODS no proc title. That just gets rid of that subtitle that says frequency report. And I'd also like to make sure that when I create my macro definition, I get a message in the log that says that it was created successfully. So I'd like to add in right before the percent macro statement, options, compile note equals all. This allows me in my log to be able to see that this was created successfully. So let's go ahead and run this whole program. Let's take a look at the log. And right at the bottom, we get the note that says the macro ratings report completed compilation without errors. That's great. That's what we want to see. Notice how when I ran this, I only got code in the log. This is just creating the macro definition. This is just putting our leftovers within the container. To actually pull out those leftovers to use this reusable code, we are going to call our macro definition. The way that we call our macro definition will be using the percent sign and typing the name of the macro definition that was created, ratings report. Since we're using parameters, as a reminder, since we had these values within these parentheses, I'm also going to include parentheses right next to ratings report. I'm not going to put a semicolon. We'll run just this line of code. Taking a look at our log first, we get to see from our macro definition call, the table was created, we had underperform output for that format, and we also were able to get our observations read in. Let's take a look at our results. Awesome, there we go. We have average overall satisfaction rating. We also have the overall satisfaction rating 1 to 5 stars. If I had chosen to maybe look at just my reviews that were 1 to 3 stars, going back over to my macro definition call, I would need to specify the names of the macro variables and then the values that I want, because they are keyword parameters. So I need to write in the keyword and then the value. So maybe I want to do star 1 to 3. Within the parentheses, we'll write in star low equals 1, and then we'll add in star high equals 3. Even though we did not put in a value for rating type, SAS will still use overall because that will be the default. So keyword parameters, you have to type out the keyword equal to the value, but keyword parameters also give you that default if you do not specify a value. So I'll highlight the call, select run, and taking a look at the results. The first report is going to be the same. We didn't make any changes there. But with our second report, because of us adding in our values for star low and high, we now have overall satisfaction 1 to 3 star ratings. So I can really focus on the different product groups that have a lot of 1 stars, 2 stars, or 3 stars. So that is the beauty of being able to work with our macro definition, as well as being able to work with those keyword parameters, where we'll be able to have a default, as well as be able to change what values I want to write in. So this is everything that we've done so far. This is our normal report that we work with. Let's get into what we actually need to do of adding in our state to work with. So race star low equals 1, star high equals 3, just to have a little bit more room down here. And right now, this version of the report, we still would like to keep this. So leave this here. And on line 2, where I'm creating the ratings report macro definition and specifying the parameters, I will add in the word state and then put a comma. Even though this is a parameter, this is going to be a different type of parameter than what we have with rating type, star low, and star high. This is going to be considered a positional parameter, and it does have to go before the keyword parameters if we're going to use both within our macro definition. If I do not write anything in the parentheses when I call my macro definition, that will be null. So positional parameters, they do not have a default value. Okay. So let's go ahead and get over into the code itself. So I'm going to have a parameter that'll be for state, and there'll be 3 different versions of what's going to happen with this parameter. We'll either not put in a state at all, which will return the reports that we've been working with already, exactly in that way. We can put in a single state name, and it will return these 2 reports, but specifically for that state. And then third will be, I want to put in the word detail, And this will show report number 2 for every single state listed out. Okay. So our first piece, leaving it exactly the way that it is, we're going to use some conditional logic. So we'll have percent if ampersand state equals null. So if we do not write anything in our parentheses when we call our macro definition, percent then, percent do, all of this exactly the way that it's written. The reason why we have a percent do is because we want to do more than one statement. We want more than one statement to be executed and be written out. For our do groups, for our percent do groups, we need to have an end statement. In this case, it'll be a percent end statement. And we'll put that percent end statement right below all of the code that we want to happen when we do not write in a state. So we'll have percent end semicolon. At this point, I'll rerun the code all the way up to the call. I won't run the call just yet. So we'll hit run. And we'll check in our log that this was able to be created successfully. We take a look, macro ratings report completed compilation without errors, which is awesome. That's what we want. Now let's do our macro definition call. We have percent ratings report. We'll select run. We have our message, this is completed successfully. And great, we get exactly what we saw from before. Doesn't seem that exciting, but the fact that it worked is great. Go back over to the code. So we have our first condition if we want just our overall view of what we've been working with. No state incorporated. Now to add in if we have a state put in. So we'll have else do something. So if we didn't specify state, I want this particular code in this particular way submitted. Else will entail us going down and specifying the word percent else, percent do, and then a semicolon. Make sure that we have our percent end, and then another semicolon. And in between here, this is where we're going to specify that I want this to happen for a particular state that I choose. So at this point, it might be good to add in some comments. So right next to a percent if ampersand state equals null, we'll write in run this code if we do not specify a value for state. And I'll finish out that comment. For my else, write another comment. Run this code if we specify a state name. And for the sake of this demo, we're going to assume that people will always spell the state name correctly. We'll use the right casing. If you want to go through and make sure that we account for any mistakes, there are a few classes out there in different videos that you can take a look at. Especially the Macro 1 course that goes a lot into validation. Just putting that out there. So going over with our percent else, percent do, I will copy both of the reports from above. For this demo, we're going to have everything laid out so we can see it well. So else do, run this code if we specify a state name. So for our first report with average satisfaction rating, everything for the most part will stay the same, except that now, since I want to include state, I'm going to have to add in a few where statements, as well as change up a couple of titles. So we'll create the table, average overall, since that's what we have for the default right now. We'll still select product group in the overall column from product reviews, but I also would like to use where. I'd like to insert the where clause. So where state underscore province equals ampersand state. And it's important to remember that when you're creating our macro variables, you need to have double quotes there. So this is going to give us the ratings for just a particular state. And then in the proc print step, we'd also like to mention that is going to be for state. So that's going to be for this title. Average overall satisfaction rating by product group and state. Let's add in a secondary title. So we'll have title 2, and then in quotation marks, we'll specify that we will use ampersand state, and then semicolon. Average overall satisfaction rating by product group and state. And the state is whatever is chosen. For the second report, for that proc frequency, same idea, satisfaction ratings by product group and state. We'll add in a title 3. And for title 3, we'll have ampersand state, and then semicolon. I also need to edit the where statement, because right now it's still looking at everything. So we'll have our rating type between a certain range and state underscore province equals ampersand state. So to review, else or percent else, percent do, this is going to be if we specify state name. We haven't talked about the multiple state names just yet. We have an either or right now. Create the table of overall or average overall. We'll select product group. We'll select that average, but only for the particular state that we're interested in. Then we'll do our group by. Same idea with the proc format, that's creating that color for under 3. And then for our title, we'll have the average satisfaction rating by product group and state. Title 2 will specify the state. And then we have our proc print still staying the same. For our report 2, we'll have our 3 different titles. We'll specify satisfaction ratings by product group and state. We'll also have our title 3 that'll include what state we're referencing. For the proc frequency, where we're showing that two-way frequency of product group by rating type, our where statement changes by adding in and state underscore province equals ampersand state. Then of course we have our percent end to finish out that percent else, percent do. Run the creation of our macro definition. Checking the log. If I scroll down, the macro ratings report completed compilation without errors. It's always good to see. Let's do our macro definition call. First thing that we'll check is that we can still see something even if we do not specify a value with the ratings report. It's always good when you add more things in to make sure what you had from before works. So select run and do our macro definition call. So far so good. We get a little note saying it was completed successfully and awesome. What we had from the beginning is still there, 1 to 5, and we're looking at everything. Now the test, going back over to code, will be when we specify a state. So we can have a state, for example, like Ohio. So I'll type Ohio into the parentheses. Something that's also different with positional parameters versus keyword parameters is that with positional parameters, you do not need to specify state equals. You just put the name of the state. You just put that value. With keyword parameters, you do have to include the name of the macro variable as well as what you want the value to be. Okay. In this case, even though I specify the value for my positional parameter, remember that the keyword parameters are still working to specify, if I scroll up, rating type equals overall, star low equals 1, and star high equals 5. Okay. So I'll highlight my macro definition call and select run. We get our little box that says this is completed successfully. And here we go. We get average overall satisfaction rating by product group and state. This is for Ohio. We also see the breakdown 1 through 5 for Ohio, which is great. If I go over to my log, no errors, anything like that. I could also go through and choose a different state. For example, maybe I want to use Alabama. I'll type in Alabama for the parentheses. I could choose to specify something other than overall. So maybe for my rating type, I'll say rating type equal to something like value. I'll run my macro definition call, specifying Alabama, specifying rating type equals value. We get our little box that this is completed successfully. And here we go. One change that happens is with our titles. If I go back over to my code, remember that our titles were going to be based on what my rating type was. Previously, we've been working with overall every time, but I want to point out that it isn't always overall. In this case, because I specified value, my title will say average value satisfaction. Our label will have average value rating. Same thing with our breakdown, value satisfaction. And we have Alabama as well as Alabama down below. The beauty of having our keyword parameters as well as our positional parameters, as well as creating a macro definition that has different parameters. You don't have to create macro variables with your %let statement over and over again. So great. We have our first version of the reports running smooth, where if we don't specify a state, we have everything just generally. We have our second version of our report, where if we specify state name, it runs smoothly. I don't want to have to go through and type out 30 or 40 of these macro definition calls to have Alabama all the way out to Texas or Utah. Management wants to be able to type in one word and multiple reports get created from that one word. Since I have this else do, for my condition of if I specify a word and I get multiple values or multiple reports, I'm going to add this right in between those two conditions. So instead of doing another %else do, I'll specify %else %if, because I'm looking for a specific phrasing that will go inside of those parentheses. So %else %if ampersand state equals details. And I'll have details in all caps. As I mentioned, there are different ways to validate that when someone puts in a value, we want to make sure it's good. I'll show one example here. Let's say that if I typed in details in all lowercase letters, that will not match up exactly to my condition. So in order to make sure that whatever I type in, or however I type in details, matches with what is in my code, what is in my macro definition, we can use a macro function around that macro variable name. And what this will do is say, if the capitalized version of what I type in equals this, equals details, then I want to do something. So regardless of however I type in the word details, it'll be able to work. So if it's details, %then, %do. And I'll add in my %end. Okay. Putting in my commentary, run this code if we specify the word details. And what does this do with details? Creates a report for every state in my data. And it's going to create a separate report for every state. With the version previously, this was giving just an overall summary for the country. With the report version below, this was just for one state. This time I want to have a report for Alabama, a report for Alaska, a report for California, all listed out for me to scroll through. For this particular report, I just want to have a breakdown of the satisfaction rates. So we'll select our code from above, that proc freak. And this will be that breakdown of the satisfaction rates. I can add in a little comment just so we remember what this is. Okay. So break down of satisfaction rates. Okay. So we have our proc freak. We'll do our product reviews. We'll have the where statement. This will be very similar to if we chose one state. Because I still want to have and state underscore province equal to something. And I'll leave this blank for right now. I still would like to have that third title equal to something as well for our state. Scrolling down to where we just choose one state, with my proc freak step as well as my titles, I need this to happen multiple times. Of course, I'm not going to copy and paste this 50 or 30 different times all within that details. That would be way too much. But I do want the exact same thing to happen over and over and over for the number of times that I have states, and also filling in that state name as I go through. So I need to create a macro variable that'll have each state's name in it. One thing that I'll do, or the first thing that I'll do, is create my macro variables that will have our different state names. I'm going to do this outside of my macro definition. I'm just going to pull up a new tab and show you how this would look. So I have +, create a new SAS program, and we'll use proc SQL. And we'll have our quit statement. With proc SQL, I would like to say select the distinct state underscore province names from product reviews. Let's run this just to see what we get and make sure that I spelled everything right. Here we go. We get to see our different state names, some provinces. So I do have DC here as well. We get a full listing of what's there. Instead of me having to scroll through and count every single state, I would like to have the number of states put into a macro variable, and I would also like each state name to be a macro variable. The way that I create a macro variable from our data within proc SQL is using the into clause. With the into clause, we will have a colon and then the name of the macro variable that I would like to create. So we'll call the macro variable state name. Then, right up under my proc SQL step, we'll do %put to write something to the log, ampersand state name. So we'll run this. And let's take a look in the log at the program that was submitted. So we submitted our proc SQL step, but we also have %put ampersand state name. That's awesome. We get Alabama. Alabama was our first state name. I want each individual state to go into a macro variable. So in this case, I'll create state name 1 and then put a dash. What this dash is going to represent is that I don't know how many states there are, but just keep creating state name 1, 2, 3, and so on until we get to the end of that list. So I'll put in state name 1. I'll also put in ampersand state name 2. And I'll do state name, if I can spell it right, state name 3. Just so we can make sure that this worked out okay. So we'll run the proc SQL step that includes our into clause with state name 1 and then a dash. The results are going to still be the same. What I'm interested in is the log. And I get exactly what I want. State name 1, Alabama. State name 2, Alaska. State name 3, Arizona. I would like to use this code in my macro definition. So I have state name 1 through however many there are. That's great. But I also needed to find a way to know how many states there are in total. A macro variable that gets created when we're running our proc SQL query is one that's called SQL OBS. And what SQL OBS shows is how many rows are returned from our query. So run the %put statement with SQL OBS in it. And when I check the log, we see 52. So for this data, Puerto Rico and DC are included as well. Right. So going back over to the code, this is the information that I need. Put a little spaces, clean it up just a tad bit as far as our syntax goes. And I would like to copy this proc SQL step and include it inside of the %else, %if for the details scenario. And I'll write this right underneath the %else, %if line. So if it's details that I write in to my macro definition call, go ahead and create macro variables for however many state names that there are in my data at that time. And also behind the scenes, %SQL OBS will be created. That's great. We created macro variables that have state names. We have %SQL OBS. What does that mean for us in our scenario for details? Well, %SQL OBS gives us a stopping point of how many states there are. Ampersand state name will help us fill in what state province I want to use. So we have the tools, let's bring it together. Since I want to have something happen over and over and over again, I need to use a %do loop. A little bit different than the %do group because the %do group is just going through this once. I want to have proc freq and all my title statements having a run of multiple times. So we'll have %do written in I equals 1 %2 some stopping value, and %do loops also need to have a %end statement. So I'll add in %end right underneath the proc freq step. The stopping value of how many times I need to loop through is going to be based on how many states there are. And as we've seen already, there is a macro variable that tells us how many states there are. That is the SQL OBS macro variable. What this will say is loop through the proc freq titles however many times there are the number of states, which in our case will have, or states and provinces. States will run through 52 times for these reports. The next piece is actually adding in what the state names will be. So we know, going back over to that other tab, each state's name is saved into something called state name and then whatever number coincides. Going over to our proc freq, I need to have this value of the state's name on our where statement. I also need to add the value into our title 3 statement. Now you may assume that you would just say ampersand state name ampersand I. You'd assume that that would work because you'd think, okay, well, ampersand state name and then ampersand whatever the value of I is. Each time we loop through the code of proc freq with our titles, I increments by 1 each time. I will increase by 1 each time. Unfortunately, the way SAS will run and look at this particular macro variable is SAS will try to resolve ampersand state name on its own, which we are creating state name 1 through state name 52. So unless we already have ampersand state name listed here, SAS is not going to know what that is. And then it will resolve ampersand I. So we'll just have ampersand state name and then a 1 or a 2 or a 3. It won't go through and resolve this. I need a way to tell SAS, hold on, wait a minute, come back to state name, resolve ampersand I first, and then resolve everything together. That can be done by adding in a second ampersand. I like to call it the hold on, wait a minute rule. Really, it's called indirect referencing. I like hold on, wait a minute a little bit better. So what'll happen will be those 2 ampersands will resolve down to 1. SAS will continue past state name and then resolve ampersand I to whatever it corresponds to in our looping. Let me pop over to another SAS program and I'll write this out for us. Okay. So if we had ampersand state name ampersand I, and we were on our first loop where I is 1, with the 2 ampersands, this idea of hold on, wait a minute, that will resolve down to 1 ampersand behind the scenes. SAS will not try to resolve state name just yet. And then SAS will resolve ampersand I. In this case, if it's the first loop, ampersand I will be equal to 1. Because we had told SAS to hold on, wait a minute, because it had resolved the 2 ampersands down to 1, now SAS knows to go back and scan this whole entire macro variable to return something like Alabama. So this is indirect referencing, the forward rescan rule, my personal taste, the hold on, wait a minute. So we will use this phrasing of our macro variables, this indirect referencing within our code. So let's go over and check with our proc freq. We have state name, ampersand I. We have our 2 ampersands in front. We have state underscore province. Everything seems to work well here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight our macro definition creation. Hit run, make sure it works out. We see that the program has completed successfully. Let's check the log. When I scroll down to the log, it tells me that we have completed compilation without errors. Now let's run our call, percent ratings report, and then details. So we'll run. And this will run a little bit slower because we have multiple states that we're accounting for. All right, so we got results. If we take a look in the log, we see that each time we have something written here, we don't have any kind of warnings or errors. And the first thing of the results is that proc SQL output. We'll go back and take that out. But we get to see Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, and so on, which is exactly what we wanted. So going back over to the code, in order for us to not see that output from the SQL query, right next to proc SQL on line 43, I'll specify no print. I want this query to run, but I don't want to get a result output. I'll run everything together, make sure that this works. And we're just checking to make sure our no print does not have the proc SQL query listed for the results. Okay, so I'll scroll up, and awesome, it doesn't have that. So this accomplishes our first goal, where we have 3 different versions of our report. We have a version of the report if we do not specify a state name or details, and when we make our call, for the results, we get to see the highlighting, we get to see the overall satisfaction, 1 to 5 stars. We are able to just specify one state. So we have Ohio, for example. Run our call. Our results just say Ohio. Our results are only for Ohio. And then, as we saw from before, the details, where we had every single state listed. This was brought in part by using our %if, %then do, where we specified if we had a null state, and then the code that we wanted, the %end statement to end that first do group, %else, %if, the capitalized version of state is equal to details, %then, %do, loop through this code over and over and over again for however many states come from our table of product reviews. And then finally, anything else, which is just putting in a state name for our purposes, will show 2 reports for that specific state. Everything looks great in our SAS environment. Second objective, don't forget, is we want this to be in Excel as well, regardless of whatever version it is, as far as the reports go. Since I want to create an Excel document regardless of the version of the report, whether it's no states, detailed states, or one state, I will put the statement to create the Excel document outside of the conditional logic %ifs. This statement will be an ODS statement, and I'll specify that I want to create Excel. So ODS stands for Output Delivery System, and with Excel as my destination, this is saying, hey, I'll put these results to Excel. I'll then add in file equals to specify what file I'd like to create. For my file that I'm going to create, I would like this to go over into my SAS Explorer folder, and I can right click and specify insert as path inside of my quotes. Now, it would have worked if I would have clicked inside of the quotes, but no problem. We have copy and paste. So I have inner quotes /home/student/Explorer. And I would like to call my report reviews. Now, then we'll have .xlsx for my reviews. And I can even call it reviews report. That might be a little bit more specific. Reviews report. Okay. So we have ODS Excel file equals. Before I run the whole report, I need to go over and specify when I'm ending what goes into the Excel document. Scrolling all the way down to right before the %m end, we will add in ODS Excel close. This way that the destination is closed and any other code that gets run does not go into our Excel document. Those are the first two statements we'll add. We'll see how this looks from here. So I'll start out with just using the null value. So I'll run everything together, creating the macro definition, adding in that Excel, and then doing my run in that call for ratings report. So I'll select run. We get our results, of course. That worked out just fine. What I'm really interested this time, especially with the log, is scrolling down to the bottom to see that we wrote to an Excel file. So we see reviews report. Let's go over to the Explorer and see if it actually was created. There we go. Reviews report. I'll right click and let's specify to download the file. So we'll click reviews report. And awesome, here we go. We get product group average overall rating. There's that first report. And then we get to see our second report, our breakdown. But the more that I look at this, there's a few things that could be better. For one, my titles aren't here. Neither is my footnote. My title is not in the report for my second piece of that breakdown. And even though the name is good for my Excel spreadsheet, I would much rather have my worksheets have a good name as well. So it's good, but it's not great just yet. So let's go back over to the code. The first task that I would like to take care of is adding in my titles and my footnotes to Excel. I'd like to embed those titles and footnotes. For that first report, right above my title statement, I will add in another ODS Excel statement, but instead of specifying file equals, because the file is already created, I'm going to now specify options. And for some of my sub options, this is going to deal with embedding titles, specifying that I want to embed footnotes, and specifying what I want the sheet name to be. So we'll specify embedded underscore titles equals yes. Also, embedded underscore footnotes equals yes. As far as the sheet name goes, for this first report, what I would like this to be will be called the rating type satisfaction, whether it's overall or value. We'll have sheet underscore name. So we'll add in our sheet name. So we'll have sheet underscore name equal to, and in double quotes because we're going to use a macro variable, ampersand rating type satisfaction. ODS Excel Options, we want to include the titles that we brought in from Title 1, Title 2, and Title 3 in our different reports. I want to include the footnote that's being used. And for this particular report with the proc print, the sheet name will be, in this case, Overall Satisfaction. I will use this statement a few more times in my code because I have those 3 different versions. So go ahead and add that code in. So this was above the proc print with the average satisfaction rating by group. Above my titles for the proc freak, I will also add in the ODS Excel Options statement here. Embed the titles, embed any footnotes that are there. But for this particular sheet name, I want this to be called star distribution. So I'll specify star distribution. Okay. Copy this statement for ODS Excel Options and continue down into, we have the details version. Right above the title statements, I want embedded footnotes, embedded titles. For the sheet name, this will also be the star distribution, but I will change up the naming just a tad so that everything will fit. So we'll have star dist with a period, and we'll have ampersand, ampersand, state name, ampersand I for the star distribution. Scrolling down a little bit further, same idea. Above the proc freak in the titles, copy and paste the ODS Excel Options for star distribution. Above the titles for proc print, paste the options, but instead of having sheet name star distribution, I want this to say the same thing as what we had before. Ampersand, rating, type, and then satisfaction for the particular state. Ampersand, rating, type, satisfaction, colon, ampersand, state. So each of the different reports will have an ODS Excel option statement to specify we want to use the titles and footnotes, as well as we want to specify a sheet name. For null, we'll have ampersand, rating, type, satisfaction, and star distribution for the sheet name. For the reports that have for details, the ODS options will have embedded titles of yes, as well as the footnotes of yes. The sheet name will be star dist, and then whatever the state is. Finally, when it comes to just one state, the titles and footnotes will be embedded, and the sheet name will have the rating type, satisfaction, colon, whatever the state, and star distribution for the state. So for this one, we'll have our colon, we'll have dist, just to make it a little shorter, ampersand, state. All right, so far so good. ODS Excel Options. I'll run the whole program, creating the macro definition and doing my macro definition call. We'll first start out with no value for state. All right, on our results tab, things are good on the SAS side. In my log, if I scroll down, we're told that we have writing to Excel. Let's check out what Excel looks like. So the reviews report, I'll go ahead and download the file. Open that particular file. And there we go. We get our titles across the top, overall satisfaction, ratings below 3 stars, overall satisfaction as far as our sheet name, and star distribution. Great. So all this works out for that no value with state. Let's try using details. So I'll write details within the parentheses, submit the call to the ratings report macro definition. Details is where we'll have every single state listed out for the different reports. The results, still good. We have each state. Let's check with the reviews report. Right click, select download file, open reviews report, and awesome, there's the Alabama, star distribution Alabama, star distribution Alaska, Arizona, and we get to see each one of those different worksheets. Then third time's the charm here. Let's try this out for just one state. We'll choose Alabama, select run, we have our results. Let's take a look at our log. We have a little message here. So it tells us overall satisfaction dash Alabama will be too long. It'll be truncated. Let's go back over to our code. And instead of having the full word satisfaction spelled out, we'll leave this as just sat. And we can change this to be something else if we wanted to. So we'll have overall sat just for the purposes of our demo. Let's run everything one more time. Right click on reviews report, select download file, and there we go. Average overall satisfaction, Alabama, star distribution, Alabama. Awesome. So we got our reports to work for our 3 different versions, and we are able to create our Excel documents. It's got both of our goals accomplished in just about an hour. Scrolling back up just to recap, what we had previously was a macro definition that worked for just overall value, whatever rating type we wanted, and we had our choice of what star rating we wanted. Then we needed to add in 3 different versions of the report to be created. 1 that'll just keep everything overall in general. 2, a listing of all of our different states, and then 3, specifying 1 state. This was made possible by using conditional logic, as well as being able to use iterative processing. So with our conditional logic was that percent condition, percent then do. We had our percent else, percent if, our percent else. For our iterative logic or iterative processing, we have percent do, I equals percent to, and percent SQL obs. We don't have to come up with that number, and our percent end. To work with our Excel documents, this is all from about 3 statements. ODS Excel file equals, and our ODS Excel options with all of our various sub-options of how we want our Excel document to look, where we wanted to use titles and footnotes and have them embedded, and we wanted a specific sheet name. So overall, this gives us a nice starting point to maybe even creating more Excel documents for management. Maybe they want to look at countries and cities and so on. But now we know exactly what to do to have some conditional logic in there, as well as iterative processing. So thank you very, very much for listening. Once again, my name is Brittany Jones. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to email me. I thank you for your time and attention, and I'm sure your manager will thank you for your knowledge learned.